Welcome to the webinar, What's Going On with Engagement, Why It's Not Working, and How Mentors and Managers Can Turn It Around. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Rolfe, and I have a background in adult learning and career counselling and professional development. I've been in business for 30 years. My latest book is called Mentoring Mindset, Skills and Tools, and I've spoken on this topic in Australia, Canada, China, Singapore, the Philippines and USA. These webinars are attended by people in all parts of the world. And I just want to let you know that I do speak from a corporate point of view, but I've worked with not-for-profit organisations, educational institutions, government agencies and community groups. So the content is applicable there also. And during this webinar, because I will be talking about profit and offering a number of statistics and so forth, I will be inviting you and have a conversation with you about, well, what are the measures in a non-profit organisation or a government or educational institution? How do you measure those similar sorts of results? So let's start to take a look at what's going on in engagement. And I can tell you that worldwide, employee engagement stands at only 13%. Here in Australia, it's 24%, and in the US it's a little better in 32%, but let's not get carried away here. What that really means is the majority of workers right around the world, here in Australia and the US, the majority of workers come to work because they have to, not because they want to, not because they get any joy out of their work. They're not necessarily totally committed to what they're doing. And I want you to think about the repercussions of that. I'll share with you what the research says, and you might share anonymously or otherwise what that might mean in your organisation. Because we'll see that it has serious implications for both employers and indeed employees as well. So in this webinar, we're going to talk about why engagement strategies don't work. And I'll offer you some evidence of that. I'm going to suggest a new approach to employee engagement. What we're doing now really isn't getting the results. So obviously we need to do something else. There have been measures in place of employee engagement for over a decade. There have been attempts and very strong attempts and a lot of money spent on trying to make a difference, and overall it's not making a big difference. So I'm going to suggest a new approach, and I'm going to share with you 4 ways managers and mentors can turn engagement around. So give you some specific suggestions. So what do we even mean by employee engagement? Let's talk about that first and foremost. And again, let me remind you, don't wait for a pause or when I invite your questions. If you have a question, a comment or an observation or something you'd like to contribute, please do so at any time. I'll be keeping my eye on the question box. And a reminder, you can make that anonymous by simply typing in the letters ANON before your question or comment. So I'll respect your privacy that way. So I'm going to put up a table here for you. And I'll make this available to you after the webinar. If you'd like a copy of it, just send me an email and I'll send that copy to you. Most of the research categorises people in these 3 groups: engaged employees, disengaged employees, and actively disengaged. And I thought it might be fun to contrast the 3 in a few different areas. So engaged employees, these are the people that love their work. They love coming to work. Not to say they do it for nothing. They want to be paid and paid fairly, but they really enjoy what they do. The disengaged people, they're indifferent. It's ho-hum. There's no real magic there. There's no real joy for their. The satisfaction kind of goes up and down. But the actively disengaged dislike their work. They're coming definitely because they have to and not because they want to. Engaged people will speak positively about their organisation. They have a degree of pride in the place they work in. Please feel free with your comments if you want to make them as we go along. I'd love to see some coming in and share those with you. The disengaged are emotionally detached. and that actively disengage. They're overtly negative about the organisation. In other words, they're bad mouthing you out there on the street. When they socialise with their colleagues, with their friends, they're not saying anything good about their organisation. Engaged people perform above and beyond. I wonder how many people, how many of you have actually been, and it might be in a retail situation, it might be a government agency, it might be on public transport, it could be anywhere where you find people going above and beyond your expectations, going out of their way to be helpful, to be kind, to be of service to you. Whereas the disengaged, they do the bare minimum. They basically do what they have to, and no more, no less. They know they're being measured or watched, perhaps, and so they do what's necessary. But the actively disengaged, they actively resist effort. If they can get out of it, they will. Now, here's where we see something that's of value to the employee themselves, not just, well, I guess really all of the above, you could say, have value for the employee, but this one in particular has measurable and noticeable outcomes. So engaged people, we have evidence to show they are less stressed at work when they're engaged in their work. Disengaged people are more stressed, and actively disengaged people actually create stress for other people and make it more difficult for those around them. So engaged people are reliable. They're less likely to call in sick. They'll come to work. Disengaged people will come to work as well, though they might drag themselves in to work to share the misery with other people and spread that misery around. But they are quite likely to take what we call in Australia sickie, so to take a day off work, whether they're sick or not, whether they could come to work or not, they'll take any excuse to take a day off. And bear in mind that absenteeism costs $2 to $5 billion per annum, and that's an Australian figure I'm quoting there. So it's likely to be higher in the US. And I know we've got about 50% of the people online here today are from Australia. The rest are from the US. I'm not sure. I know we had someone keen to join us from the Philippines today. I'm not sure if she's online or not. So engaged people feel like they belong. Now, this is a basic human need. We all have that need to feel we belong to a family group, some sort of tribe. Some people describe it as that we feel a part of, whether it's supporting a sporting team, whether it's a club that we belong to, whether it's a neighbourhood or a community, whether it's an ethnic group that we identify with, or whether it's our group of our own friends, a social group, or indeed the workplace. We have strong human needs to belong in a number of groups with whom we can identify. But the disengaged people prefer to be somewhere else, doing something else. So they might have a sense of belonging, but it's certainly not one they relate to the workplace. And the actively disengaged, they are alienated. They avoid inclusion. And this may spill over not only in the workplace, but in their social life as well. And you can only imagine what that does to people in terms of their well-being. And I have a comment about well-being later on. So engaged people obviously are going to be more productive for themselves in the workplace. Disengaged are less productive, and actively disengaged reduce the productivity of others who have to pick up their slack. Engaged people are loyal. They're likely to stay with their employer and make a positive contribution in their workplace, whereas the disengaged are likely to leave, resulting in recruitment, onboarding, orientation, and productivity costs for replacing them. Now, the actively disengaged are a problem because they won't leave. They're hanging out for a redundancy. I know here in Australia we have many organisations are still in restructuring mode, and people know that if they hang around long enough, they'll get a redundancy payout, so they won't leave. But they're hanging out waiting for their payout, waiting for retirement. They're not doing anything to contribute. In fact, they're dragging down others around them. And I actually have a family member who sometimes talks about work colleagues in this category, and this is horrible for them and for the people around them. So, looking for your comments and observations on this, because actually the Gallup organisation have talked about a crisis of employee engagement. They've identified through their worldwide research that 20% of employees are actively disengaged, and this is what that looks like. So even if you've got a good number of your employees who are engaged and trying to make a contribution, you've got kind of the disengaged in the middle, not making a difference either way, and the actively disengaged working against them. Okay, I'm seeing a comment from Liz here. Okay, so Liz wants me to go back to the previous table. So let's, let's see if we can go back. I have a super sensitive mouse that doesn't want me to go back. Why is that? Here we go, we're going back. Okay, there's the table for you, Liz. And if you drop me an email, I'll actually send you a copy of this table that you can have in your notes. I'm sorry, I didn't think to make it a handout for you. What I want to do now, though, is actually, and I put this table together through a whole variety of sources. All of the statistics I'm mentioning today are referenced either on the slides or in my own notes, and I gathered this information from a whole variety of sources. The Gallup organisation is one that provides great resources, research-based articles, and that you can access yourself. So if you go to gallup.com, you'll find all sorts of great articles there that will be of help to you if you're researching this topic. But I drew from a whole range of other sources that you'll see referenced on my slides later on as well. Right now, I want to get some input from you by getting you to share some information on a poll. So here's the poll coming up on your screen now. You can choose one or more of these responses because I expect that more than one apply. And as well as choosing responses, I'd like you to type in comments. So don't just kind of tick the boxes here. I'd like to get some conversation and some input from each of you. So what we're looking at here is what's going on in your organisation. So does your organisation conduct some sort of employee satisfaction or climate survey? There are all sorts of these that look at various aspects of the organisational culture. It might be called a culture survey. It could be a climate survey. It could be called employee satisfaction, or maybe it's called something else. So feel free to share that. And just a reminder, type in ANON if you want your comments anonymous. Otherwise, I'll mention your name unless I kind of pick up it's a bit sensitive. Does your organisation measure employee engagement specifically? So are you actually doing something about this? Is it on the radar? Are you doing some measures of it in some way? Have you taken a Gallup or some other organisation? There's lots of organisations that do these kinds of survey. Are you doing something to specifically measure employee engagement? And we haven't specifically defined it yet, and there are different definitions, but we'll get to that. If you have measured it over some period of time, have you actually managed to increase employee engagement? I made kind of a blanket statement, a generalisation earlier in saying that employee engagement is not working, but I know that some organisations have actually made strides or small steps towards increasing employee engagement. Are you one of those organisations? Would you be willing to share some of what you've done in terms of the results and the actions that have helped you? Love to hear some of that. Do you have some strategies and or plans for employee engagement, or is employee engagement not even on the radar? It's not on anyone's agenda at the moment. So I'm just looking for those. We've got quite a good response coming in. 73%, 82% have actually voted. I'm thinking we're getting close. That's a little bit of time I'm allowing here because there are multiple options, something to think about here, and you can choose more than one. So just looking also for comments coming in here. Okay, so just while those last couple are coming in, actually, I think I'll close this poll now. And I'll share the results with you in just a moment. So Liz is saying, I think poor management strategies can and do really kill engagement. And without mentors, you're dead in the water. I couldn't agree more, Liz. And that's my take on exactly what's happening. I'm going to talk a little bit later about it, but really, most of the mentoring programs I run provide employees with what I call an offline mentor. Now, I'm not talking about offline as opposed to online, on the web or email or something like that. I'm talking about offline in sense of they're not in the line of authority. So they're not the person's boss or their boss's boss or anything like that. They're a step away. And the conversations are confidential. They're wide-ranging, and often they're conversations that you might not be able to have or might not be willing to have with your own manager. And I think these these mentoring programs and these mentors and mentoring conversations make a difference when it comes to employee engagement. But I agree with Liz, who's saying without mentors, you're dead in the water, particularly when you've got poor management. I'll talk some more about that in a moment. Okay, so Nisha is saying it's just a ticking box activity once a year. So I'm gathering from that, Nisha, that your organisation has some sort of climate survey, culture survey, employee satisfaction survey, and that is something that's basically a ticking the box activity. So yeah, I think we need to go beyond that. I also think people have survey fatigue, and they get very cynical. If they don't see anything change that's linked to that survey, they go, well, why bother? Just say anything. Okay, so Rochelle is saying our transform agenda has recently been put in place, and after years of knowing culture has to change, we have finally made some small steps in improving engagement. Well done, Rochelle, and thank you for sharing this with us. Oh, this is a long comment. I'm going to continue reading this. So after years of knowing culture has to change, we have finally made some small steps in improving engagement. Some things done are capability assessment. Take some notes of this, people. This is input from one of your colleagues who has made a difference. This is a real life case study, and thank you for sharing it, Rochelle. Okay, so things done are capability assessment, making people accountable and following through if not performing, providing training on having difficult conversations, moving people on that are not engaged, either through the other measures I've mentioned or through development opportunities. Capability is a big problem in our organisation. So there you have it, folks, and thanks for sharing that, Rochelle. I'll come back to some of those comments a little bit later as I make my recommendations, and I think you're going to find, Rochelle, they align perfectly with what your organisation has done. But your organisation is one that's in the minority. Excuse me for a moment. Okay. So Vincenzo is saying we have senior executive staff meeting face to face regularly to hear what staff on the ground have to say and pass on key messages directly. Communication. I was just reading an article yesterday from the Gallup organisation, and they say consistent communication and two-way communication is one of the keys to employee engagement. So there you are. You're on the ball as well in your organisation. So thank you for sharing those examples, very positive ones. Okay, so we've looked at this image, which I think really sums up the position that many of us are finding ourselves in, and the comment that came through before about being dead in the water if you don't have mentors. So if we've got bad management happening. Okay, I want to get on to the definition now, and according to Hewitt Associates. And again, there's the reference at the bottom of the slide. You can look this one up if you want it. They've defined employee engagement as the state of emotional and intellectual commitment to an organisation, the degree to which you have captured the hearts and minds of your employees. So the assumption seems to be that if they feel good about your organisation, so you've got their heart, they feel good about your organisation, and often this works well in the favour of not-for-profit organisations, so charities, community groups, perhaps to some degree in medical practices or hospitals, where there's kind of a bit of an altruistic motivation there, service motivation. And we know some people that's a high priority, a high value for them. So you're more likely to attract those sorts of people, and that works for you. So if they feel good about the organisation, you've captured their heart. And if they think the work that you're doing there as an organisation is important, so you may have captured their mind, the assumption is that they'll do a great job. I don't think that assumption stands up. I don't think it naturally and automatically follows. It may do in some cases, but I don't think winning the heart and the mind is enough, let alone when you might have their heart, but they're feeling quite cynical. The mind says, you know what, we say we're on about this, our mission statement, our vision is wonderful, but really we don't put our money where our mouth is, or really the way things operate around here are not consistent with our espoused values. But even I believe, and please call me on this if you have a different opinion, but I don't think we can automatically assume, even if you have won their heart and mind, that they're going to do a great job. I forgot to share the results of that poll with you. Let me rectify that now. So here are the results. So 80%, wow, 80% of people on the line today are in organisations that conduct employee satisfaction or climate surveys, whatever you want to call those. But someone did point out for their organisation, it's simply a once-a-year tick-the-box activity. I'm hoping that more and more organisations are really diving deeply into this information and doing something practical and useful with it. Okay, 40%. So a lesser number, it's about half of those, measure engagement specifically. 20%, so a small number, actually have increased. So they're measuring, so you've got some before and after measure and can see some progress there. 50% do have strategies and plans, and I'll be interested for your feedback as we go through this about the strategies and plans that you have, and whether there's alignment with the sort of things I'm suggesting, whether you're doing that, whether that's what's working, or whether you're doing some of the things that maybe are not doing so well. Interesting. But look at this, 30% engagement isn't even on the radar, doesn't make it to anyone's agenda. Okay, so let me put away that. I'm sorry for being slow for sharing that with you. But let me tell you why engagement ought to be on the radar. Now, this is where I'm going to talk about return on investment. I'm talking from a corporate perspective. So please, I'm giving you a heads up now. I'm going to ask for your input. What are the measures in your organisation that may not be financial, or may not be, or might be different to these ones? So what I'm sharing here is, and this one probably relates to not-for-profit organisations as well. So basically, employee engagement has been shown to impact on service, quality and productivity. In fact, more than that, it impacts on customer satisfaction. So government agencies, I think this is a measure for you, some sort of client or customer satisfaction as well. Please give me some input here about what you're measuring. In the retail industry, by the way, employee engagement has been shown to be linked to shrinkage. So a negative correlation there. So as employee engagement goes up, shrinkage goes down. And for those of you who may not have experience in the retail industry, shrinkage means merchandise that's lost, usually by theft. So your product shrinks because it walks out the door without being paid for. So a negative correlation there. Engagement goes up, shrinkage goes down because people care. And they'll be observant of potential thieves, shoplifters, and the likes. And also, I'm sorry to tell you this, but I once worked with a security in a retail organisation, and I was surprised to learn that most theft is by employees. So that would be your actively disengaged employees who deliberately steal from their employer, and perhaps the mildly disengaged who think nothing of, raiding the stationery cupboard or, walking out the door with things that don't belong to them. So we're looking at, in the retail world, or in a corporate world, increased sales is a return on investment in engagement, higher profit, therefore, and a greater shareholder return. In fact, the research shows that companies with engaged workers have 6% higher net profit and 5 times higher shareholder return over 5 years. So I'm guessing that in government agencies, not-for-profit education institutions, we're looking at measures such as the quality, the service, the productivity. In some universities I've worked with, they talk about, as well as employee engagement, student engagement. So that's kind of like a little like customer satisfaction. So what do you measure? Would you type in now, what sort of measures would tell you that there's a return on investment for engagement? What sort of business outcomes do you measure in your organisation? I'll leave that. I'll continue on, and I'll come back to those comments as you have time to type them in. So what are you measuring in terms of outcomes in your organisation that might be linked, as these have been shown to, with increased employee engagement? What I can tell you is the cost of disengagement in the US is $450 billion, with a B, $450 billion. The most obvious link to the bottom line is retention, because disengaged employees are 4 times more likely to leave. So think about your staff turnover costs. Maybe you have a figure associated with staff turnover. I've seen some astronomical figures. I can't remember them off the top of my head. I do remember quoting them in another webinar, so I'll have to look those up and maybe share them with you in the future again. But I think you're looking at maybe 10 times annual salary for a very senior person in your organisation if you have to replace them. And we're going to see that engagement is not just something that impacts on your frontline staff, it also impacts on managers as well. So think about how much your turnover costs, the time and money and knowledge and experience that's lost when people leave. And you might be thinking by this time, good riddance to disengaged staff, but there's no guarantee that by the time you bring new hires up to speed, that they will be any more engaged than those they replace. So it is worth investing in improving the situation. So just looking now for those non-financial impact of employee engagement in not-for-profit organisations. So I'm thinking educational institutions, government agencies. I know we've got a few of you on the line. So Vincenzo, saying, as a government organisation, it's staff absenteeism that's measured. Every employee can see a Bradford score on their personal details. Vincenzo, can you describe or define a Bradford score? I'm making a guess here about what that means. So you're saying every employee can see a Bradford score on their personal details. I'd love to know a little bit more about that if you're able to share. So thanks. Keep those comments coming in. It's really important for all of us. I love it when it's not just me you're hearing from and getting input from, but the other people on the line as well. Okay, so I'm thinking about things, those measures being, yes, productivity, absenteeism, we've just heard from Vincenza, is a measure there, creativity, commitment, attracting and retaining talent are as or even more important for the not-for-profit sector. You know, I do a lot of work with government agencies, a lot of work with graduates, and they're very much aware, the agencies are very much aware that they can't necessarily offer a higher salary or cash bonuses that the private sector might be able to offer to graduates or to indeed to other employees. So this stuff is really important in a not-for-profit organisation. And we do know that while money is important, it's certainly not the only, and for some people, not even the biggest factor. People want to be paid fairly for their position, for their role, for their effort. But there are other factors that make a big difference as well. So you might like to think about some of those and perhaps share what your organisation is doing. So employee engagement has been measured for nearly 2 decades, and CEOs and HR directors are really onto this, and the surveys and schemes and programs are in place. Millions have been invested, yet with few exceptions, they've failed to make a big impact. Now, there are a tiny number of companies, relatively speaking, that are making huge investments, and they've established best practice. Those that are succeeding recognise that building an engaging culture depends on having a strong reputation. So we often talk about the brand in the circles I work in anyway. But what that means really is having a strong reputation out there in the public sphere. So when the name of your organisation is mentioned, people can be proud of what it does, its reputation. It may have a good reputation for community contribution. I saw a comparison the other day between Apple and Microsoft. And they were saying, hey, Bill Gates is out there, Bill and Melinda Gates are out there investing or spending their wealth on programs that help poor people in really poor countries and make a difference to their health. What's Apple doing with all of its huge profits? You know, the biggest, most profitable company in the world, I think it was described as. What is it doing with that profit? Is it making a contribution to the world that it's reaping its benefits from? Now, you know, I'm not meaning to badmouth Apple here. I'm an Apple person, but this sort of put me back a little bit and thought, well, yeah, you know what? Might have to look at that in terms of the brand reputation. So what about your organisation? Does it have a strong reputation out there in the community? Is it painted as something that is doing good for the organisation? The other thing best practice organisations are looking at is really a performance orientation. So within the organisation itself, do people get measured on performance? And the comment that came in before from Rochelle talking about, well, we look at building capability, we measure capability, we give feedback, we develop people. So there's a performance orientation that's really there, and that is part of what's making a difference in getting the results in employee engagement. And the last one here, and the one that really draws my attention as well, and what I'm really on about here is leadership excellence. So where we have good leadership, best practice in leadership, managers who are leaders and know what to do and how to do it. So just looking for the comments coming in. Please feel free to keep questions or comments coming in at any time. Vincenza is enlightening us about the Bradford score. It's a score of the number of unplanned absences across a 12 months period. So we know we're going to have public holidays. We know we're going to have annual leave, and there might be other planned absences, perhaps parental leave and those sorts of things, but unplanned absences. So in this particular government agency, any employee can look up their record and see how they're doing on the Bradford score. So thanks for sharing that. And that's an interesting way. Feedback to employees is so important, and that's another aspect. I just want to make the point, though, here that even though there are organisations doing great things, there are benchmarks set in terms of best practice. We need to be aware that organisations can only lay the foundation here. So lay the foundation for employee engagement. So you're not going to get true engagement without these things being in place. So basic benefits, such as job security. I know that's a real difficult one, but people have lived with insecurity. I've been a consultant for the last 30 years, and throughout all that time, I became a consultant back in the 80s when Australia was having what we called the recession we had to have, or at least our politicians called it that. And it was the first wave of job insecurity. Before that time, people thought, if you worked in certain places, if you worked in a bank, if you worked in a government agency, you had a job for life. That's been wiped out across the board. But people need to know, at least basically, they've got a job as long as they perform well in that job. And no untoward, we had the global financial crisis that hit organisations right around the world. Here in Australia, we were fortunate. We fared better than most, but we still fared fairly badly compared to previous times. Probably the worst time back to the recession in the 80s. But people want that feeling of some sort of job security. They need to know if they do a good job, if they're working well. Apart from untoward global circumstances, they're going to have that job. And safety is another thing. People need to feel safe. So if you have good occupational health and safe, or workplace safety, we call it now in Australia, practices in place, that actually helps. If you have anti-bullying, anti-harassment, if you have good processes in place, if you have an employee assistance scheme, so people know there are people they can go to if they're having personal problems, those things really make a difference. If you have company policies in place, and I'm talking about things like diversity policies that are more than just words on a page, that are actually lived in the organisation. So those company policies, a customer focus and communication. And we heard also earlier from one organisation that has senior managers sitting down with the frontline staff, having two-way conversations and getting those key issues on the table up at the higher levels. So that's a company policy, a practice that really works. And it's related to, the next one, which is the structure of work as well. So structure that enables people to collaborate with each other. And a lot of mentoring programs, I also find one of the aims is actually to cut down silos. We have different parts of the organisation that seem to operate in a silo, don't talk to each other. And one of the things a mentoring program does is it connects people right across the organisation. There's two-way communication and learning and connection and relationships built up and that tends to have a benefit of across the organisation collaboration. What people also want structured into their work is a level of autonomy. So they're not micromanaged. They can make decisions for themselves. Perhaps there are parameters on those decisions where, people have to escalate a decision further up, but if you can empower people to have a certain level of discretion and autonomy in decision making, that is part of the foundation of engagement as well. And finally, this idea of treating people fairly, not having a culture that favours the few and has kind of unfair practices where some people are penalised and other people are rewarded, and it's not transparent. So these are the things that lay the foundation for engagement. So I want to get on now and talk about why engagement strategies don't work. So I'm talking about these top level strategies because what the organisation does is important. But, managers alone, I believe, have the power to turn around engagement. No amount of beanbags, pizza, or gym memberships engage people in their work. These are often thrown up as examples, as, a fun environment, a culture where people are going to be engaged. But it's a great manager who gets the person is more likely to build that engagement. And the reason for that is employee engagement is not the same as having a fun environment. That's nice, that's great, but it's not the same thing. It's not engagement is not the same as happiness, and it's not even the same as satisfaction. Let me tell you why. Employees can have fun but get nothing done, so they're not productive. So there goes our engagement idea. They can be happy but not productive. And satisfied employees don't necessarily make the extra effort. So remember, we were talking about engaged employees, the ones who go above and beyond. Satisfied employees might not necessarily do that. And they can also be lured away by other employees who offer more. So if they're going to chase the dollar, or if they're looking for promotion, or if they're looking for development opportunities, and these are the things that people switch employers or seek new jobs because of. Engaged employees are enthusiastic and loyal. They enjoy their work. They make a positive contribution. So what I'm getting at here is what the organisation does is important, and it needs to hire the right people. It needs to onboard them well, pay them fairly, and treat them fairly. But in the end, it's what the manager, in partnership with the worker themselves, the employee themselves, that's what makes a difference. And in fact, I'm going to ask you now if you know or if you want to take a guess. There are many variables involved in employee engagement. I've touched on a few, and I'm going to get more into the manager and the mentor as we progress. But what difference do you think, of all the variables, what percentage do you think the manager, the relationship with a person has with their manager? So this connection between the worker and their manager, the relationship a worker has with their manager, what percentage of the variable in employee engagement do you think that makes? Take a guess, or if you know, share, type it in right now. Okay, I'm seeing some responses. Okay, these are really high. Okay, I won't say the name unless it's correct. Okay, have a guess. Those of you who have guessed, your guess is too high, but in the right ballpark. Okay, so the variance in employee engagement scores. Sorry, a bit tongue-tied. Okay, just looking, no one's got it quite right, but we're getting very close to the money here. Okay, let me share with you. Oops, went too far. Okay, in fact, according to research, and remember Gallup does worldwide research, so we got close but no cigar for the prize, I'm sorry. The relationship with the manager accounts for 70%. So that variance in employee engagement. And so all those other things combined that we talked about are only worth 30%. So let's continue. I need to pick up the pace a little bit here. Okay, so this is a widely quoted saying. People don't leave jobs. What do they leave? So Liz got close. Yes, they leave managers. They leave their bosses. They don't necessarily leave jobs. So we know that, in fact, disengaged managers. Now, so this is something we might have been overlooking. We've been thinking about disengaged staff, but let's look at the managers themselves. If they're disengaged, how can their staff be engaged? If you've got a manager who's, really ho-hum about this, this idea, not really committed, their head's not in it, their heart's not in it, how can you expect staff to be engaged? And I think there's a real clue here for us in terms of what the strategies need to be doing. Bad managers. Now, who has not had a bad manager in your work life or seen a bad manager? They are out there. And I know some organisations are working hard to do something about it, whether it's to give them the opportunity to develop and grow, or in fact, if they're unable to do that, to move them on. But obviously, bad managers result in actively disengaged workers. What a surprise. But we need to think about this. And, this staggered me when I read this. Now, let me find the actual quote here. More than a third of US workers would rather see their direct supervisor fired than get a substantial pay rise. Think about that. They'd rather you fire their boss than give them more money, because nothing compares to the interaction of managers and their direct reports, leaders and their teams. It's at the coalface. That's where people get turned on or switched off, and that's what we really need to understand here. And that's what I'm suggesting. We need to take a new approach that really focuses on our managers. We need to redefine their role. And I'm seeing this happen in some organisations, and I'm pleased to say I'm working with a New South Wales government agency that has just brought in new definitions of the role of leaders. And guess what? It has a strong mentoring and coaching component. So redefining the role. And you'll find managers will increasingly be tasked and held accountable for issues previously seen as part of corporate or human resources, HR strategy, such as employee engagement, learning and development, and talent retention. Previously, these things were kind of in the role or the job title of an HR specialist. There's also a revolution in performance management. Managers have always been responsible for this, but research and evidence of its lack of efficacy has changed, emerging thinking and practice. So the traditional performance appraisals using rating systems. So, tell me if you've still got these in your organisations, or tell me if your organisation is phasing these out and going to something different. The old tick the box rating scale, once a year performance appraisal. Well, there's a huge debate raging about this, and there's arguments on both sides, but there is a growing trend to getting rid of that annual tick the box rating style appraisal, because we know it doesn't work. In fact, I've seen articles where they say the rating says more about the rater than the ratee. So Nisha's saying we still have this sort of thing. Okay, well, you may see a change to that. So the trend is to regular weekly feedback conversations led by managers for proactive performance management. These responsibilities will require a whole new mindset on the part of managers. So they've got to really move from, I suppose, managers to leadership mindset. That might be one way of looking at it, because there's long been a talk about manager versus leader and differing definitions of each. But it's now clear, whatever the title of the position, if it involves a group of people, the manager must lead them. That means having a leadership relationship with each individual. And people must be more than reports. They must be more than subordinates. And for many managers, we'll have to develop a range of interpersonal skills. Now, I've got another poll I want to share with you now. Just get some ideas here. And again, please type in your comments as well. You can choose more than one response here. But I'm wondering about, I'm particularly interested in the role descriptions, so position descriptions, role definitions, whatever you call those, that managers are being given these days. So can you please share whether, and you can choose more than one, employee engagement, is that on? Is something about employee engagement articulated, spoken about, words on a page in the position description, role definition of your managers? Is there something in that description that managers are given and held accountable for? So they've got the responsibility and they've got the accountability for team and individual learning and development. Is there something in there about talent retention? Because what's the point of investing hugely, as most organisations do, in attracting and recruiting great talent if you can't keep it? You know, as I said, I work a lot with graduates, and the research shows that there's a huge investment in recruiting graduates. And if you don't keep them for more than 3 years, you haven't yet begun to recoup your investment in their talent. They might be contributing, they might be doing worthwhile work, but in order to get back that return on investment you first made, you have to keep them for 3 years. And, you know, people don't stick around once they've got some job experience, unless they are engaged. So do your managers, are they required to have these performance development conversations? Government agencies in New South Wales have brought in a capability framework over the last, I think, 4-6 years, and now they're bringing in a capability development framework that tasks managers to have development conversations, to have plans in place and regular conversations with their staff about this. So what are you doing? So I'll leave that poll open just while I read some of the comments. So Nisha said that was the performance appraisals. Rochelle's saying, we are looking, and then Rochelle's in the organisation, remember, that has made progress in employee engagement. Rochelle said they're measuring and they're seeing progress. And they've done a whole range of things. So Rochelle continues, we are looking at phasing them out in favour of training managers in being able to have effective and ongoing conversations. So clearly, Rochelle, your organisation is up there at the leading edge, looking at the research, reading the thought leadership on these topics, and actually enacting and active in this whole area of making a difference in employee engagement. Okay, but Liz is saying in her organisation, not at all. No one is talking about engagement. My goodness. Okay, so hopefully, Liz, you'll be getting some ammunition. I had to use that kind of analogy, but hopefully you're getting some good information here that you can make a case, get some allies to make a case. So Rochelle's saying they certainly are, but change still takes time. So Rochelle's from the organisation that is making positive changes and getting results, and she's saying change takes time. You know, you can't expect this to happen overnight. Okay, so let me just close that poll. I've skipped ahead with my slides here, so I need to go back. Okay, so just quickly sharing those results. This will give you a bit of a benchmark. So jot these figures down and jot where you are. So the first question was about, in their role descriptions, our managers are accountable for employee engagement. A measly 17%. I bet that's you, Rochelle. Team and individual learning development. So we are making strides there. Now I'm suspecting that's because the 70-20-10 concept has been around for about a decade. People have been taking on board. HR, learning and development people have been leading the charge on this, getting this message across, it would seem. And I guess I've got to be careful too. This is a small sample, and I'm kind of preaching to the converted here. The very fact that you're on this webinar live or watching this recording, kind of preaching to the converted. You're either personally or in organisations who are at the head of the game in most cases. So we have made inroads here. Talent retention, nothing. Managers do not understand their responsibility, and they are not being held accountable for retaining the talent that's hired. We need to change that, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, and half are saying yes, performance development conversations are in that scope. Okay, so let me put that away. Let's quickly move on. I realise we're getting towards the end of our time. I've got some important things to share with you in this final piece. So, what we really need in our new approach is we have to get managers to have these regular coaching and mentoring conversations. We need to do it in areas, I call it partnering. Now, this is a term that's been around for a long time in government agencies in a completely different context. When they hire consultants like me these days, they talk about partnering. So it's not just my input, there's a sharing there, and it leaves a lasting legacy, if you like. Now, managers need to understand that their role is going to be more and more, and 50% of you said yes, they've got it on their job descriptions to have these sorts of development conversations. But first you have to build the relationship. So there's some synergy there. We've got to build trust for a start to have these sorts of conversation. You know, as we move away from that idea of performance appraisal, that judgmental approach where you've got to tick the box or a rating scale, this is a different sort of conversation. This isn't about judging a person about their performance. This is about partnering with them, building the trust that there's an interdependent team here. And we know that the most effective teams are interdependent. We recognise that we each rely on the others in this team. So first of all, building that trust, the synergy and the positivity and engagement. So that mindset of interdependence. Next, making sure that there's a sense of purpose. Our goals are clear. There are outcomes. You know, I don't often use a sporting analogy because I'm not a sporting type person. But one of the reasons when teamwork works, it is when we're playing as a team, we have clear goals. We're heading in the same direction. We're all trying to get that ball in that same net. We all have our different roles to play. You know, we might be a winger, we might be a back defence player, we might be a striker out the front there, literally trying to put that ball in the back of the net. But we all have roles to play, but because we're all on the common field working with clear goals. I wonder, in organisations, in working teams, in work groups, are those goals crystal clear? Is our role in that? Is our purpose really clear? Because that's a factor in employee engagement, and that's a factor where managers can make the biggest difference. And of course, this is what mentors do as well. So it's up to managers too to unlock the potential of all their people, not just the chosen few, but I believe, and it's my experience, that every employee I've ever met has more to give the organisation than they are currently giving. There is untapped potential. There is talent there that organisations don't tap into. And we can actually do something about that at the manager, at the leader level. So helping people identify their talents and helping them to develop their strengths. And then, of course, performance. Now, yes, this has always been in the description of managers, but we're looking at coming at it proactively, getting the best results by proactively managing performance by regular feedback before the fact. So setting people up for success, not judging them after the fact. So in fact, there are some places where this is called feed forward instead of feedback. So having these conversations that help people figure out what to do differently in the future, rather than what they should have done differently in the past. Now, there is still a role for feedback. We can learn from that. But it's really about managing proactively into the future. Now, as I said, most of the mentoring programs that I run with offline managers do these things. They partner with people, they build the synergy, they build trust, but they do it offline. It's a separate person. They develop that sense of purpose so people get to know how their role fits into the overall organisation. They certainly, in a mentoring program, it's all about the person's potential for development, to grow in directions they want to grow, to develop their career, to develop professionally. And it certainly impacts on their current and future performance. But you know what? As good as those programs are, as much as I love being involved in them and see the great results they get, it is not enough in today's environment. We have to, because it won't counteract the bad manager, the disengaged manager, or even a manager that they hate, or even a manager who doesn't understand this new people leadership role or that mindset of interdependence, or a manager that doesn't have the skills to have mentoring or coaching conversations with them. Might be a slightly different type of conversation to the offline mentor, and there's probably still always going to be a role for both. But we need to get our managers doing these coaching and mentoring conversations themselves. So here we are. I'm going to wind up now. We've talked about why engagement strategies don't work in the main, or don't work enough. They're not having sufficient impact. They're slow to make an impact. I've shared with you a new approach to employee engagement, one that focuses on managers and mentors, but mainly focusing on the manager. And I've shared with you those 4 ways, those 4 types of conversations that really build the relationship with people, that will build engagement. So as I wind up the content of this conversation we've been having, and I will stick around and take any questions, and I will be asking for your feedback in terms of what's the key takeaway for you and what's the action. I just want to share with you another quote, again from an article from the Gallup website that you can access yourself if you want. This one was aimed at graduates, but I think there's lessons here across the board. Now, Gallup have for many years made the connection through their research with not only engagement, but also how that impacts on people's well-being. And in all the surveys they do, they've found 2 questions that correlate really strongly with both engagement and individual well-being. So engagement has impact for the individual as well as the organisation. These questions are, is there someone who encourages your development? So, and this is why mentoring is making such a difference. So when if the manager's not fulfilling this role, when people have a mentor who do. But ideally, wouldn't we have both? Wouldn't we have a manager who was interested and encouraging their staff's development? And a mentor as well, because you can take kind of a different, broader view, okay? And the second question is, do you have the opportunity to do what you do best every way? And this relates to what I was saying earlier about every employee I have ever met has more to give than they are currently doing. And if you can find ways to find out what they do best every day. What are their talents? How do we develop those talents into strengths? And how do we enable them to apply their strengths in their work every day? We know this connects not only to engagement, but to people's well-doing. And the bottom line in this article that I was reading, the single most important thing, and this was addressing to graduates, but I think it applies across the board, the single most important thing you can do to help ensure your future success is to find a great manager or a great advisor and mentor. So that's the input for today. I will stick around for your questions, and I'm particularly interested in your key takeaways for the session. So please take a moment before you go to share what's been an insight for you, what's been most valuable, what was the key point that you'll share with others, and what will your action be? So just as I'm waiting for those comments to come in, a reminder, if you would like a webinar designed especially for you, maybe you'd like me to talk about these topics to your managers, via a webinar, happy to do that. Drop me a line, send me an email, or phone me, and we can set up a time to talk about perhaps a webinar especially for you, designed for your audience. So let's wrap this up then. What are your key takeaways? What are your actions? And what are your questions? I'll keep the recording go just for a minute or two more, but I will be here to respond as long as you are. So, okay, so Danielle's saying, adding accountability to the PDs of managers. Yes, we've got to make them accountable. But if we make them accountable, we've also got to support them in developing. And I was just in a meeting with a client just this week where they have got these rewritten job descriptions for people in their organisations, and they have recognised if we're going to make people accountable for this, we've got to support them in developing both the mindset and the skills. So that's what we're going to be doing. Okay, so Liz is saying, now remember you can do this anonymously, just type in ANON if you want to make a comment, and I won't mention your name, but Liz is saying, my key takeaway are the absolutely abysmal employee engagement numbers, and that a third of employees in the US would rather see their manager fired than get a raise. That is incredible, isn't it? I nearly fell off my chair when I saw that. Imagine going to work every day and wishing, rather than more money, which is a pretty human, natural thing to want, but you'd rather see your boss fired than get a raise. That's staggering. Okay, Rochelle, okay, key takeaway. Okay, Nisha, my organisation is losing a lot of staff due to lack of mentoring, so management is introducing a manager leadership program with mentoring as part of it. That is wonderful. That's great news, because often, mentoring programs are brought in for the certain level of staff, but what we need to focus on is those leaders. Who's mentoring them? So Liz is saying actions, training managers in emotional intelligence and training all staff members in how to have difficult conversations, the joy of conflict management, and to have more effective direct communication. Yeah, there's a lot of books and a lot of material out there on crucial conversations, difficult conversations, courageous conversations, and I commend that literature to you. Excuse me. Okay, Nish is saying, key takeaway is the talent retention should be part of the manager's job description. And you can put some numbers around this too to make a business case for having talent retention as part of the accountability of the manager's job description. There will be data you can identify either within your organisation or outside of it in HR type associations or professional bodies. You can find some hard numbers on how much it costs to hire, how much it costs when you lose someone. So you can make a strong business case because you can relate that. You can do the research, as I have done, and you can find the statistics that you can quote that directly relates retention to turnover and the manager's responsibility. Okay, Daniel's saying we would be interested in discussing possible webinar for our upcoming performance. Look, we need to get on the line really quickly on that. If it's coming up on 16th, 19th May, I will actually. Oh, I've lost my slides. Okay, so I'm going to stop the recording now.